Okay, it is about 8:31 p.m. Tuesday, June the 1st, and welcome to week number 4. Week 4 of Introduction to Criminal Law. And as everybody already knows, my name, Richard Wright. I'm your professor. Some say Dr. Wright, some say Professor Wright, some say Richard. It doesn't matter. Either way. And as I tell my students, if you have an issue, reach out to me. Best way to reach out to me is text and or on our phone call. You have my phone number, and the least uh, the method to use the least is emails. Few of you have opted to use emails, and it's taking a little longer to uh, resolve your issues. One of the things I always tell all of my students is to make sure that they pay attention to my comments that I post when I grade your papers, because I always tell you if they're late. I tell you also if they miss some of the points of the rubric, and I express those. And then if you need clarification with those, reach out to me. I'll be happy to. But I try to be as detailed as possible to make sure you get this. Now, one of the first things I do want to say is that we're starting week 4. At the end of this week, which will be next Sunday at 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time, that I will not be accepting assignments from week 3. Of course, if they're late, then you're still going to lose points. And of course, weeks 1 and weeks 2 are already beyond 7 days. But if you submit them, I may give you points for them, depending on the circumstances that I'm aware of. I said at the beginning of this course, make sure that you let me know about any extenuating circumstances that you may run into. And several students have taken me up on that, and I've shared with them, please let me know when you submit your assignments that why they're late. Put a note in there to remind me, because when I'm in the grade book, I'm not going to remember the emails. So anyway, or conversations. So that having been said, I just wanted to make sure you understand that we are in June, and we're going to right now get into the information here that I want to share with you. This is my screen. All right, this is what it looks like for me. This is your student preview, which I like to make sure that I use because it keeps me from providing information about emails and things that you send to me. These are all the emails that I've sent out, including most recently the PowerPoints. Should be for week 4. Let's see, I don't see it. I know I sent out the PowerPoints for week 4. Did everybody get the PowerPoints for week 4? You can type that in the chat and I'll see it. Okay, I thought so. I don't know why it's not showing up in here, but it should show up. But this is the week 3. Okay, at any rate, my message is here. So now let's get into the assignments. So for week 4, we have actually several assignments. So let's look into the discussion post. Obstruction of justice. And you use this scenario. And in your initial post, you should be familiar with Terry versus Ohio. And if you click on the link, it'll help you to find that. what crime was about to be committed. Is lying about one's name a crime? If so, explain that. Explain your legal justification for temporary detention and what you can demand from the man during the temporary detention. Can you pat down for weapons? Even if the person refuses, explain your answer. In your reply post, defend your position regarding all 4 questions with another student's response. And then, of course, your responses are submitted. And of course, you know your initial post is due tonight by 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. That's June 1st. And that your reply posts are due Saturday at 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. Okay. So now let's go to the written assignment. So this week you have your written assignment, and then you also have your live lecture. So it's not a whole lot this week. It's your written assignment. So let's talk about your written assignment. In the past, I've noticed that a few of you did not pay close attention to the rubric, but let's go to the assessment itself. So in this first part, you're going to deal with the fleeing and eluding police. And you're going to deal with pursuit practices or policies that exist. We'll talk about those. There is a sample document. Now, some students think that when they see these sample documents in PDF, that they can submit their papers in PDF, but we already know the answer to that question. That Word document is the way to submit it. If you submit it PDF, you're going to get a 0. Then you can resubmit it. Anyway, you need to pay attention to this case. And so it's a minimum of 2 pages. 2. Double space. Remember, it's APA formatted. Citations in the body and throughout the paper. Remember, citations support the statements that are contained in your papers, because you're not an expert, but you've conducted research to find the materials. So what was the justification for the pursuit? Explain that in your paper. Were the officers operating as authorized emergency vehicles? Explain that. Identify 2 criminal laws that Joseph violated. Explain the elements and don't consider any traffic infractions when answer this. Not traffic infractions. So we're talking about criminal laws outside of traffic infractions. So you get that clear. Was the full roadblock justified? Explain why or why not. And identify at least 2 other options that could possibly be used to terminate vehicle pursuit. We're going to talk about some of those. Make sure you cite your sources, including a reference page, APA citations in the body of the paper, and proper format. Be sure that you do that. And I'm going to show you the rubric in just a minute. All right, the second part of it is creating a flyer. Now, remember, once again, the flyer also has to be in a Word document. There are a few students who submitted in the previous assignments for week number 2. I haven't graded week 3 yet. PDF documents, and they asked me how do they convert it. You should be able to do that automatically. The system gives you an option, and if not, reach out to personal support for some assistance or a tutor, student tutor, to help you in terms of getting that done. But we have a sample fleeing or eluding document. So review review it. In your flyer, explain the elements of the statute that must be proven to deal with fleeing and eluding. In other words, the policy and so forth. Explain when it is justified or permitted. Refer to the sample pursuit policy for additional information. You can also select another of your choice or maybe your own jurisdiction. Be sure to cite it when you do so. Very important. All right. Identify due regard that the police have to consider. In other words, how do they have to operate? Due regard has to do with, remember, considering all the circumstances that involved with the chase, whether or not a pursuit was it necessary. We'll talk about that in just a few minutes. And identify at least 3 techniques that can be used. We'll talk about that as well. So you can use, now, the problem with Microsoft Publisher is you can't put it in Word document. So I prefer you don't use Publisher. A student pointed out to me that it says or Publisher, but I always say in my lectures, opt for Word documents so that I can run it through Grammarly. I can't run Publisher through Grammarly. Very important. Very important. All right. And then this is a guide that can help you. We talked about that, dealing with online library, which is a place that you can find a lot of good sources to support your statements as well. APA, tutoring, and so forth. All right. You can submit your assignment by zip files, or you can just attach 2 files to it as well. I've seen students do it that way as well. And some students did attempt number 1 and attempt number 2. Yeah, because if you do, then I'm going to have to grade them both. But the final grade will be the highest one. So that's the assignment there. And again, I'll show you the rubric in just a few minutes. And then, of course, your live classroom phrase that we have. So that's what you have for the week. In the meantime, let's take a look at the course calendar. As you can see, I like to use the month view. This is where we are now. We are now in week 4. Notice this. Your initial post, as I said, is due tonight. Your reply post is due Saturday the 5th. Your written assignment is due on the 6th. Okay. Notice what's going to happen. The term ends the 18th. So by the time you get to Friday the 4th, we're going to have 2 more weeks in the course. Absolutely ends the 18th. If you submit something the 19th, it is not going to end up merit you any points, right? Unless you follow the procedures that are set out. So that's the course calendar. All right. So everybody should be pretty clear on that at this time. All right, let's go back to the course home. Okay, now I want to show you, before we go to the announcement, I want to go to the rubric. There it is. So if you pay attention, what happens is that your rubrics, you get 1/4 for each section. So if you don't, out of the total number of points, you can lose 10 points, 10 points, 10 points, 10 points for a total of 40. But you got to make sure that you satisfy each of these issues. Okay, there it is right there. You click on, open it up. One of the important things is 2 pages, and run your papers through Grammarly. The organization, levels of achievement. So you're going to satisfy all of these requirements: spelling, grammar, paragraph form, double space, APA citations, which we provide enough, no Wikipedia or sources that are not credible. So that's a total of 30 points there. And then the last part is submitting your flyer, which must be original as well. That's why I want it in Word document. And you're going to deal with the issues that are indicated here. That's the rubric. Now, I want to point out something to you, that with the rubric, what I will do is I will provide grading details, and I will have a section for comment. You have to read that, and it will tell you why you missed it. So if it was late, for example, I've been pretty fair with late assignments for the written assignments. Hold on a second, excuse me a minute. And so, but as far as your discussion posts, remember, it was only on week 1 that they were both due Saturday at 11:59 p.m. Central. After that, starting week 2, initial posts on Tuesday, reply posts on Saturday. There are people who submitted discussion posts after Saturday or on Sunday, had not submitted them, and they got zeros. So very important. Okay. So that I wanted to make sure that you got. Let's take a look at the announcement. As you know, you can view your archive and you can see your previous attendance. I don't need to do that. Announcements. Here you go. So here's the announcement for week 4 this week. Move you down there. Crimes against the government and public order we're going to cover. And chapter 8, you had 1 chapter of the textbook, and then we're going to deal with the activities: domestic terrorism, obstruction of justice, resisting arrest, fleeing police, disorderly conduct, and free speech. And then we'll just briefly go over the key terms for practice: free speech, or disorderly conduct, and then that practice quiz, which, by the way, I'll come back to in a minute. Your discussion assignment, obstruction of justice, we've already covered that, and your written assignment, fleeing or eluding police, that's due Sunday. Then be sure to complete the mid-quarter survey, and then you know about my motto: adversity is the springboard to success. Continue to get your assignments in on time. Ask questions if you have any. You probably discovered from taking the week 3 exam, which is basically your midterm in this course, that covers weeks 1, 2, and 3, that and by the way, a few students asked me, can I let them know what they which ones they got wrong? I can't do that because a few people were still taking the test, and I don't want that information out there for integrity of the exam itself. However, the truth of the matter is that, remember what I said to you about the practice stuff? I encouraged you to utilize that. And when you took the test, you saw that I reported correctly the fact that some of those questions, I didn't say exactly, but variations of the questions were from the practice quiz, from the other materials there. That those little practice quizzes, as well as doing those what they call for practice things. So that's why I said do not forsake them. However, do not substitute them uh, for getting the assignments done. So some students try to do that. And so, you know, I have not looked at the exams um, because of the fact that you know I don't want you to be able to uh, I can't show you the exam information there, but you rest assured of what I said. So anyway, that's the week 4 announcement. Okay. Any questions so far about week 4 or anything else? Okay, very good. I try to make sure I'm very thorough with the information. As I said, remember, if you need me, reach out to me. Don't be afraid. I will be happy to help you out there. Sounds like you guys got things going here. All right. So let's go and move into week 4, crimes against government. Of course, you know where to find a live classroom recording. Right now, those people who um, they would see that right here, but then of course that's going to be changing after I replace it with the link. Okay, so let's start out by talking about what is going on with domestic terrorism. People at the present time, our country is so full of domestic terrorism as a very serious issue. When I say domestic terrorism, I'm talking about mass shootings. I'm talking about bombings. I'm talking about all kinds of things that happen on our soil. Attacking individuals because of their race, sex, national origin. This is June 1st, start of LGBT month. Um, and people should not be attacked because of their sexual preference. People should be respected. I've already established that from the get-go or the beginning in week 1, that that's the way you operate. That's your personal business. If you want to talk about it, that's fine too as well, but no one's going to criticize you or put you down. But there is domestic terrorism. So what is domestic terrorism? The FBI says terrorism is the unlawful use of force or violence against persons or property to intimidate or coerce a government, the civilian population, or any segment thereof in furtherance of a political or social objective. So I consider hate crimes in that same category, because what you're doing is you're affecting the rights of individuals. And when it happens on our soil, American soil, it is considered as domestic. Now, right now, one of the big areas that the FBI has identified as domestic terrorism is attacks on people based on their race or sexual preference. Asian Americans, African Americans, Jewish Americans. This is ridiculous, but these are crimes that are happening at the present time in our country. It's kind of concerning to me. I'm 71. I lived through the Jim Crow era, which was in the 50s. When I was between 50 and 60, I was 10 years old. I turned 10 and 60. I remember a lot of those different things. Um, but now we've come to a new level where there's violence. And so anyway, When violence is carried out, whether it's by whoever the group is, and if the group is outside the United States and it takes place outside the United States, then it's international. So we're going to talk about that right now. So international terrorism, what is it? It's an act, of course, as I said earlier, affecting human life outside of the United States by a foreign terrorist organization. Remember, it has to be foreign terrorist organization, and it violates the laws of of a state where the event took place and or the United States. You should be aware that United States Code USC 18, Chapter 18, is where you can find all the federal criminal laws. Each state has their own criminal code about violations. And the purpose of the activity is to force or intimidate a civilian population. That's why I mentioned the attacks on people because of their race, sex, or national origin. To influence the policy or to influence the policy of government by intimidation or coercion and affect the conduct of a government by mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping. September the 11th is an example of international terrorism because the acts were carried out on U.S. soil by a foreign terrorist group, Now we're going to talk about some acts that took place in the United States based upon domestic terrorism in just a minute. But remember, carried out on a soil by a foreign terrorist group. Okay. Would the Ku Klux Klan fit international or domestic terrorism? Which one? That's correct. Nazis, the other organizations that are out here, the Proud Boys, the QAnon, it goes on and on and on. Domestic terrorism is terrorism from within our country. Listen to the difference. It carries out the attack against fellow citizens, government, or any segment. Domestic terrorists have aims and objectives that are similar to those of international. So I think earlier when I talked about the attacks on race and things like that, I was talking about terrorism in general, but to specifically categorize what was taking place in our country, we're talking about within our land itself, including Hawaii. It is domestic terrorism. So here are a few examples of domestic terrorism that you may or may not be familiar with. The Olympic Park bomber, Eric Rudolph, targeted anti-abortion clinics between 96 and 98 and resulted in the death and injuries. The one that really is prevalent in our country is the Oklahoma City bombing, which took place in 1995, which Timothy McVeigh and I forget the other person who was his partner who were involved, but they bombed the federal building in Oklahoma City, resulting in 168 people killed and more than 600 men, women, children. And the purpose for it is a political, to avenge the handling of an earlier incident at Ruby Ridge in Idaho, where a federal agent was killed with a 14-year-old child. He believed that that Ruby Ridge was improperly handled And so now they're going to kill additional people to make a point. That's sick, but that's exactly what happened. But because it happened on our soil. Okay, so now, so the acts of domestic terrorism, as you should already know, Homeland Security deals with national security, both international and domestic. You also have the FBI. You also have the CIA, and you also have on the domestic realm joint activities between the federal, state, and other local authorities to help apprehend. For example, it talks about how Timothy McVeigh was caught for a minor violation when he committed the act. Eric Rudolph was apprehended by hiding and was stopped, didn't realize that. And so the federal government has the primary jurisdiction of these. So these are federal laws, but the state and local authorities assist in investigating them. So that's it. So we're gonna give you some examples of dealing with these two. All right, let's talk about obstruction of justice, which is going to be beneficial for you to be aware of. So what is obstruction of justice? It means what it says, obstructing justice. And it includes not just lying, but deliberately mishandling police or withholding information that prevents governments from effectively investigating criminal matters. Is the submission of reports that do not actually portray an incident by local law enforcement an example of obstruction of justice? Is it? Is submitting a report that you know is not accurate or attempt to cover up what really happened in a police or incident report, is that obstruction of justice? At its highest level. And we unfortunately have a lot of that. You know, here's the deal. People are upset, you know, like the Black Lives Matters and other organizations and the things that you see that are happening throughout the country, which, by the way, I will be doing a Facebook Live discussion on topics like that on the 11th of June for about 3 hours as my commitment to the community. But here's my point, is that you can end up in jail for that, as you've seen that with the fact that we have cameras now all over the place. And so that can happen before you get to court. And it is ridiculous to try to find a situation where you want to write a report so that to cover up stuff. If you do your job the way that I teach, educated, professionally, and very ethical, particularly those last two, you will stay out of those kind of situations. And so you can also find individuals who also lie about crimes. Like, for example, some of you may be familiar with the Jussie Smollett case that took place last year. Actually, it was year before last, where Jussie Smollett was on the TV show Empire, and he claimed that he was attacked by two white guys wearing MAGA hats, Make America Great hats, in Chicago, and led the police on investigative hours, and then they found out later that that wasn't the case. So many police hours were used. Well, that is an example of deliberately misleading the police. Okay. Now, obstruction, though, can also take place in court. That is by the number one way is by perjury. So what happens during criminal proceedings is as you see this young lady raising her hand, right hand, she swears or affirms. I never swear, I always affirm to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth. So help me God. So when a person willfully does that, they're obstructing justice. And many have gone to jail for perjury. You also should be aware of the fact that that takes place also, like, for example, signing an application for a loan or paying your taxes, understating your income, lying on the application for assistance, and anything. The truth of the matter is, integrity will keep you out of all of that. Truth is always the route to go. Always, not sometimes. All right. Somebody said the truth hurts. Well, guess what? Lying hurts really bad and lasts longer. All right. So this is an example of obstruction of justice on the streets. I've already kind of covered that. Now, be aware of this, that when the police stop you, you can say nothing. Okay, you don't have to speak because of our constitutional Fifth Amendment right not to incriminate yourself. And, you know, that's part of the infamous Miranda versus Arizona case. You have one of the first things, you have the right to remain silent. It's one of the first things. Trust me, and it means what it says. But if a person answers or decides to answer, they should tell the truth. Because in that case, well, though you're not, you know, you don't raise your hand in the streets, but you still can find that to come back and haunt you. Also, you can discover in many jurisdictions, lying to police is a criminal violation because it misleads the police from earlier what I was just talking about from doing their duties, interfering or obstruction of justice. And these are some of the points right here. And you can take a look at those. In some states, people have to identify themselves when their name is requested by police, and they have statutes that failure to disclose personal identification. And it says, like, for example, in using the Ohio statute, it says no person who is in a public area shall refuse to disclose their name, address, date of birth when requested. When an officer reasonably suspects either the person is committing, has committed, or is about to commit a crime. Now, remember, it's not just somebody walking down the street and they decide to stop them because they want to. It has to be reasonably suspicious. It's like the Terry stop, which actually is part of that. And the person witnessed any of the following: an offense of violence, that'd be a felony, or a felony offense that results in substantial risk of physical harm to another, any attempt or conspiracy to commit any offense listed above, any conduct that's about to be committed. So you should give that information. And again, that has to do with the infamous and the famous Terry versus Ohio case, which you will become familiar with. We call that the good old stop and frisk case, where based upon if it's a reasonable officer, suspects that the individual may be in the process of committing a crime, then they can stop the person, question them, and for their protection, they can pat the person down. Now, if they feel a bulge of a person, and it's like maybe let's say it's okay, they pat you down and they feel something, and it feels like it might be a dime bag or a nickel bag, and they ask you, what is it? And you refuse to talk. You don't have to talk. But if you talk and you say that it's such a thing, you can still lie. But if they say, can we check your pocket? And you says no. Can they check your pocket then? That's absolutely right. It has to be, and it has to be voluntary consent. We talked about that before already, I think, um, already um, in this course. Um, did I talk about voluntary consent? That you have to willingly give consent for a search? Did I talk about that? Well, I know I talked about it in constitutional law class. So the person, it has to be a voluntary search, not one where they're forced into a situation. And so anyway, the point of the matter is there it says the Wisconsin case law does permit to a person who conduct exterior pat down and minimal intrusion um, to remove a wallet. They may help. Now, there's an issue if you start to go in people's pockets and bags or things like that. The purpose for the pat down is to discover if that individual has weapons and for the protection of the officer. Okay. Uh, if the police ask, do you have to give out your name? Well, court decisions show that individuals generally do enjoy a constitutional right to refuse to reveal their name when asked. So there's an argument, and it depends on the jurisdiction and their statutes. Those statutes, some of which can be challenged based on the fact that it violates their self-incrimination. Let's say, for example, if there's a warrant out for them, they might not do it. I've had a number of clients who have given different names when they were stopped, which I told them does them no good. So it actually lets, when you get ready to go for a bond hearing, then that lets the court know that you've been involved in the system. So anyway, that's what obstruction of justice is all about. All right. Let's talk about resisting arrest. So what is that? Arresting, it is very simple. First of all, when is a person placed under arrest? Well, let me ask this question. Is it necessary to say you're under arrest for a person to be placed under arrest? Yes or no? Tiffany says no. What about you? The answer is correct. It is no, because it is going to be determined whether or not that individual is free to go. That's the key. That's it. You don't have to get any deeper than that. And so it is important for you to be aware. So there's what we call explicit custody, where it's very clear, leaves little room when a law enforcement officer says to a person, you're under arrest. That's when you know you're under arrest. All right. There's what we call implicit custody, which is kind of like what I want to go into, is less clear and would be the question of whether that person reasonably believes that at the time the police encounter takes place, that they are free to go. You can simply determine if you're under arrest or not by asking the question, am I free to go? Well, if the answer is no, then you're under arrest. And any questioning that takes place should be initiated with what? What do we call the thing that should take place before you question them when they're in custody? What's it called? You don't have to give them, but what is it called? I already talked about it, but what's it called? Yes, take the question mark off. It is absolutely right. The Miranda warnings. Yep, put an exclamation mark behind that. You're right. Absolutely. Students do that a lot. They question themselves and they have the right answer. Don't do that. Get out of that habit. Get out of that habit. Don't do that. Because you know what? That's the same process that you're using taking multiple choice exams. And then you'll say, man, I thought I was right. Yeah, you thought long and you thought wrong. So you know what I'm talking about. So that's just a little something to help you out a little bit. But yeah, facts and circumstances, as it says, related to implicit arrest are determined on a case-by-case basis. Okay. So if a police officer um, is is comes to the door, a detective, and invited into the home to speak with them, and they spoke face to face at the kitchen table, this is not an arrest because you were invited in. However, if the police officer brought 4 officers with them and surrounded them, that would give the perception that they don't want me to go nowhere. So therefore, a reasonable person should be able to conclude that they are under arrest and they don't have to answer any questions. All right. So now we start talking about resisting arrest. Now, resisting arrest is not remaining quiet or silent. Resisting arrest uh, basically involves some kind of behavior, spitting, kicking, punching, um, that when a person is attempting to put a person under arrest. And so they're Class A misdemeanors in terms of resisting arrest. It says if a person in Tennessee uses a deadly weapon for resisting arrest, the nature of the offense increases to a Class A misdemeanor. Okay. The key thing is you want to comply. So is if you're in handcuffs and you're laying on your stomach and you start to lay on your side, um, um, or try to move your body a little bit, is that resisting or not? Nope. The answer is absolutely, positively no. That's the problem, is that because when a person is in handcuffs and they're laying down, they're laying on their belly and they turn to their side, that doesn't necessarily mean they're resisting arrest. Remember, resisting arrest is something assault toward the police, punching or kicking, but it doesn't mean that you have to stay on your belly because it could be that could have to do with your breathing, as we should already know from the cases that are taking place right now. So it is very important for law enforcement people to understand that what is resisting arrest and what is not. Let's say, for example, if that person is kicking or something like that, they may be resisting arrest. Let's say, for example, a person is high and they're kicking and stuff like that. Is that resisting arrest? Yes or no? It is. Sure is. because it doesn't matter. The reason is that it takes place. Now you might have some mitigation when it comes time to dealing with the sentence. So that's it. So very good. But yeah, be very careful about uh, if a person says, like we've heard, I can't breathe, or they says I have to, my side is hurting, my stomach is hurting, and then they want to lay on their side. Where are they going? They got handcuffs on. They're not spitting, they're not kicking, or any of those kind of things. So, all right. That's one of the things that we got to teach law enforcement to be able to understand is we're supposed to protect and make sure that that person is taken care of while in custody. Okay, fleeing police. Okay, this is when we get into the biggest issue. Now, the key thing is that when a person is running and trying to get away. I'm not talking about driving. I'm talking about running. And like that guy is running there. And there's foot chase that ensued, but the police officer doesn't want to continue. Can they shoot that person? Absolutely not. You know a famous Supreme Court case that says no? How about Garner? I think it's called Garner versus Tennessee. Have you ever heard of that case? Uh, Garner versus Tennessee. Take a look at that. Where it talks about when they can use deadly force. It's 471 U.S. 1, 1985. Uh, it says that if it was the deadly force can be used when pursuing a suspect only, only if the officer has probable cause to believe that the suspect poses a significant threat of death or serious physical injury to the officer or others. That's it. So they can allow it, the person to get away. As we learned early on, that case actually came out after I went to law school, but I remember as a practicing attorney that you can't do that. Okay. Fleeing includes running away from or within a vehicle. Vehicle is the one we're going to spend most of our time on because that's the inherently um, serious one, fleeing or eluding police, because you're using a possible weapon and fleeing, eluding police in a vehicle. So what's the weapon? What's the potential weapon? Yep, perfect. The vehicle itself. And there are certain things that police officers are trained in terms of the policies and procedures in dealing with those kinds of pursuits. And we're going to spend a few minutes talking about those as well. It has something to do with your assignments. And so one of the first things that the individual should understand who's a law enforcement officer is that the officer must exercise what we call due regard. Due regard, that is the amount of care that a reasonably careful person performing a similar duty would, how they would act and would show. And they involve taking in consideration the time of the day, the volume of pedestrian and vehicular traffic, the nature of the offense, weather and road conditions, speeds of the pursuit, and the officer's driving ability. So let me just throw out a few of them at you. A person runs out of a 7-Eleven and they have a bag of chips and they get in their car and take off. In those kind of situations, do you think that that would merit a high-speed chase? Yes or no? Let's add something to that. They grab a bag of chips, but they have a weapon, a gun. Would that change it? Would that change it? They have a gun. Doesn't matter. They have the gun and they have the chips. Doesn't matter if they use the gun to get the chips. They can grab the chips and then run away and then display a weapon. So the presence of the weapon itself. Remember when it says one of the due regard issues is the time of day, nature of the offense. So the point of the matter is, if that person has a weapon, or if there's some injury possibly to some other person. So here's the fleeing and eluding statute, which you take time to look at for your assignment. The key thing, it is known that there's a high risk in police pursuits, and so therefore there are policies that and statutes that are set out by them. Now, once a pursuit is in progress, the officer has to determine whether or not it's worth continuing. If the risk outweighs the necessity of pursuit, then discontinuing or terminating pursuit may be the thing to do, because you can get them at another time. Police can use other tactics, and we're going to talk about those right now. Ramming the fleeing vehicle, using a roadblock, or we're going to talk about stop sticks in just a minute. All right. So take a look at the Scott versus Harris case as part of the assignment. So let's talk about some of the techniques that they taught us. There's what we call the PIT, pursuit intervention technique. And if you notice it, if necessary, the police vehicle, the thing is to hit the back part of the vehicle, make contact to get them to spin around. And that's oh, okay. To get them to spin around and those kind of things. So the key thing is that you have to consider due regard for the circumstances there. And you have to be very careful, because you don't want that person to injure or kill someone, including the officers or themselves. Stop sticks, that's a common way. We put those out, and we put those out in the streets, and you're familiar with those. If you ever tried to get out of a parking lot without paying where you're supposed to pay, or either you know, if you try to back out, you know what I'm talking about, you hear this psst, because you punctured your tires. And anyway, it slows you down. That's what it does. Okay. Partial roadblocks, we've done those where we have a squad car placed across the road. Boxing in, everybody should be, even if you're not old enough, familiar with the O.J. Simpson case. You're familiar with the picture of how O.J.'s Bronco was boxed in? You familiar with that one? Andrew? Yeah. So when you're boxed in, you really can't go anywhere because you got a police car in the front, police car on the left, on the right, and you can't back up because there's one right behind you. So that's used as one technique as well. All right. So those are just some of the techniques that we have. So you can download this and you can take a look at that yourself as well. All right. We're almost done. So we're dealing with, excuse me, the last part, which is disorderly conduct and free speech. When you are disorderly, you're breaching the peace, you're using fighting words, you're doing things to agitate the people, you're speaking up in somebody's face or something like that, you're using a megaphone to get up in their face and those kind of things, then in that case you could disorderly conduct, disturb the peace, and so forth and so on. Okay. Um, these things sometimes officers, as he says, are called to disturbances or peaceful protests where free speech is being expressed. But the idea of the police is to protect and allow demonstrators to peacefully demonstrate. But if the peaceful protest becomes violent, then the police take enforcement by using reasonable force to quell the riot. Okay, so you can take a look at this video, which is 35 minutes, and it will discuss that. So some key terms, here they are. We talked about each of these: explicit, implicit, resisting arrest, fleeing, eluding, due regard, riot, international terrorism, disorderly conduct. Those are terms that you want to keep in mind for the exam. And then you have these little practice things, which I'll do one or two with you before we adjourn. A man is walking in the middle of the street in a busy downtown entertainment district yelling profanities. Is this considered free speech or disorderly conduct? Which one is it? Disorderly conduct or free speech? Yep, because the man used vulgar and profane language in a public place and his actions are likely to bring a breach of the peace. Abortion activists are standing on a street corner holding signs of aborted fetuses that some citizens have cited offensive. This free speech or disorderly conduct? Which one? Nope, it's free speech because the thing is that they're standing holding signs of aborted fetuses. And just because you feel it's offensive, then it's a peaceful protest. All right. The signs are not considered to be vulgar or profane. That's in the eye of the beholder, but the answer is no. No. All right. You can get tricked by that one. All right. So let's go to the last part, which is the practice quiz, which, as I said before, we're now starting weeks 4 through 6, which will be for the next one. So let's do a couple of these. A local resident is suspecting of setting off a truck bomb at a religious temple, intentionally targeting parishioners. This is an example of what? Which one? Yep. And that's because it gives you, as a local resident, it's not a foreign, and religious activity intentionally targeting. Exactly. So we talked about that earlier. Uh-huh. Let's do one more, and then we'll call it a night. A foreign national living in your community is part of a terrorist organization from another country and intentionally blows up a city hall building to avenge the death of others in his country. Come on, which one is it? Okay. The answer is given in the question itself. Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, it's not state sponsored because it's not state. It's an individual. It's not the government, and it's not domestic. Okay. So those are some of the things that you want to um, look out for. Okay. All right. Any questions? Okay. All right. Well, in the interest of time, I'm not going to ask if you can guess a term, but yes, I am. What do you think would be a good one for this one? Uh, you said domestic terrorism. I'm going to give you one. Obstruction of justice. That's it. Give me obstruction of justice. And you put your points in a drop box and you'll have them. Okay, well, I'm going to say good night. I will see you guys next week for week 5, and we'll have 2 more lectures to go. And this course will be over, and you'll have your 2-week break, and then we start for the spring. I already just found out what I'll be teaching in the spring. I'll be teaching Introduction to Corrections and Contemporary Issues in Criminal Justice. In term 2, I hope I don't see any of you in this class because I'll be teaching this class again in term 2 in the summer. 2 sections of that, and then 1 section of drugs and crime. So, all right. See you next week. Stay safe. Get those assignments in. All right.